Greetings and welcome back. I now live in a large apartment building, so if there's background noise, it should be pretty minimal, but if there is any, it's because people are drilling and doing work someplace in a rather large apartment building, so not much I can do about that. And there isn't really an optimal time to record, save late into the evening, which really isn't my forte. So anyways, apologies out of the way. This topic is an interesting topic, the one I'm about to cover in this video. And it's one that arose in large measure due to a private conversation I had with Coltrane. And he was sort of puzzled and bemused at the recent rise of the alt-right specifically, but more generally the idea of a kind of movement that is largely centered around men, but not men in a general sense, but men specifically confined to, say, white men in this case. Although I will expand beyond that to other branches of what's going on here. Because he stated correctly that you look at men's rights, MRAs, and they've achieved nothing, absolutely nothing of any real measure that could be spoken of as having far-reaching consequences, wide, sweeping impact. Here and there, they might do something, but effectively the men's rights movement is a complete waste of time and always has been and always will be. And people can label me and paint me with all sorts of monikers, probably not the most positive monikers for saying that, but I think I have the weight of evidence behind me. The evidence that we see no changes in the judicial system across the Western world, or for that matter, outside of the Western world, really, mostly in the Western world, but also additionally that I understand human evolution. I understand sexual dimorphism, and I understand that men were never a priority for health or concern throughout human history. So this is not shocking in the least to anyone who understands these things. But if you contrast that with, say, what the alt-right has done as an example, and the alt-right is largely composed of white men, young white men, it's the reproductive movement. I've said this before. Most of these movements are subsidiaries of some sort of reproductive movement. They've gotten the spotlight. Coltrane pointed out, well, they never would have gotten there 10 years ago. I don't disagree with that. And I think a lot of it obviously has to do with a kind of, partially blatant, if not subtle, discrimination against white men. That's true. But the really interesting question here, I think, is why you can have something like the men's rights movement, which has gained no traction, accomplished absolutely nothing in decades, and something that is hitherto had been sort of rebuked by wide-scale society, now receiving not only attention, but some acceptance on some level, an attempt to understand it. So basically in this case, if we're specifically talking about the alt-right, sort of white nationalism, as a kind of white male movement, men's movement, if you will, versus men in general. And this is not the only thing out there, mind you. In fact, there are other varieties of this. There's IBMOR. Some of you might heard of IBMOR, which stands for Introspective Black Men of Reform. Once again, has a racial angle. Men with a racial angle. In both cases of IBMOR or alt-right or whatever, you see a consistent pattern here of men banding together along racial or ethnic lines, although it doesn't have to exclusively be that. It could be political or purely ideological lines, but by and large, in this case, racial, ethnic lines, and gaining traction and some kind of acceptance, at least more than what we have seen from the so-called men's rights movement, the MRM. What is the primary explanation here? I think it's actually a rather simple explanation. If you look historically and in terms of evolution at men, there is no male identity per se that men get behind. There's a male identity within a tribal identity that men get behind. Men being doers and shakers of the tribe, not merely men being doers and shakers. One thing that a tribal identity does, use as a kind of badge or banner, is it empowers men to work together and unite with each other in a way that would never happen under the banner of just men helping out other men. Why is that? I think this goes back to the very basis of human evolution and perhaps mammalian evolution in a general sense, which is to say that in the strictest sense of perception, in terms of reproduction, strictest sense, every man that another man encounters is a potential competitor for reproductive resources, i.e. women. Every man, right? The same is not true, obviously, of women. Every woman is a potential reproductive resource that can be inseminated and can pass on genes. And every man a man encounters is a potential hindrance to that, if not competitor, and someone will squeeze the other man out of the game. And thus, I think from this very simple, almost axiomatic situation, you get a type of behavior that is evolved over millions of years, going back to certainly hominid behavior, if not pre-hominid behavior, that discourages cooperation with other men as a subset, which is to say men as a subset. This is not the case in the context of a tribe, and there are a number of reasons for this. Men, I think historically and prehistorically, have always united under the banner of a cause. Tribal identity is the simplest, most primitive of causes, and they can push it further to ideological causes, and then even stranger causes like interest in certain hobbies like woodworking or whatever. But men have always united under that and worked together under that particular structure. Men have never, for the reasons I've explained, united, organized themselves along the lines of just being men, because every man is a potential competitor. If you're within the tribe, one, you might have relatives, genetic blood relatives, and that, of course, is always propitious in some sense for the passing on of genes and your kin. And, of course, as a rule, people tend to favor their genetic kin over other people. At least historically, that's what tribes were. They expanded beyond that, obviously. And inasmuch as there will be a dominance hierarchy, and there always is in such a tribe, there will be people at the bottom, men at the bottom, but there might still be the opportunity to reproduce with some woman at the lower end of her respective dominance hierarchy, if you want to call it that. We'll call it beauty and genetic health hierarchy, is maybe a better way of putting it. Basically, that the top men will get the gibs, but maybe some scraps will be passed along. That wouldn't happen in a kind of male identity ruled world. Men always organize themselves as men under this umbrella of term of the tribe, the nation, whatever. Now, this is, I think, the primary mechanism of explanation for why we see the ability of certain groups of men within a certain ethnic enclave to band together and at the very least get some kind of attention from the mainstream to a degree that simply isn't replicable by MRAs and within the MRM. It simply doesn't happen because men don't identify as men. They identify as men of X cause, in this case tribalism being the most primitive cause, men of X tribe, white men in the case of the alt-right. In the case of IMOR, it's black men. There are probably some Hispanic variants of that, who knows? And so this is something that just comes as sort of par for the course with human nature and human evolution, human biology. This is why any sort of equivalent of feminism will not only just fail, it's just nonsensical, it's a non-starter. Women identify as women primarily, and then perhaps members of a tribe secondarily. And I think there are obviously good reasons for that, furthermore, good reasons why men operate along these lines. Because in times of war and conflict, obviously the young boys would be cut down, the men would be cut down. Women might be taken away as a reproductive resource, and they might survive to reproduce, which is the name of the game in evolution. And so having primary loyalty to the tribe, you see this with war bride theory and what have you, having primary loyalty to the tribe is actually a genetic disadvantage to women. Because if tribe X conquers tribe Y, Maybe Tribe X will slaughter all the men and all the boys and the male infants, but they might keep the women around if they're fertile. They might reproduce in them, and they will be reabsorbed into the new tribe. It doesn't have to be done vis-a-vis violence, but that's certainly, I would imagine. We don't have hard evidence of this, but I think it's very suggested by the DNA record that these sorts of things happen quite frequently in the distant past, such that a pattern emerged from that. So it's not in women's interest to be particularly tribal, although they can be. I mean, you see, for example, in the alt-right, there are these sort of female attachés. I think the most prominent at the moment is this Brittany Pettibone, who's managed to shack up with some major leader of the sort of right-leaning movement. I don't know if he's alt-right, Austrian guy, I don't recall his name. And there are a few others. But, I mean, these are... When you think of the alt-right, women are never the primary exponents of any movement unless it's sort of feminism, but that's a completely different story and animal. But they tend to sort of tag along, and it's just basically a reproductive opportunism of a particular sort. It might be the case that someone like Brittany Pettibone genuinely thinks that white nationalism is a good thing and has found a kind of quote-unquote alpha leader type to associate with. Who knows? I'm not claiming to read her mind. The point is, by and large, it's always male. But alliances shift with women, and you never know, because women historically always had some chance of reproductive success even when their tribe was conquered. And so that lack of loyalty is actually an asset to them in terms of genetic fitness in the long run. Not the same with men. It's the opposite. A man who has no loyalty to his tribe is a dead man. His best chances at reproduction and indeed survival lie in cohesive, cooperative working together with other men of his tribe. Best case scenario where they fend off the other tribe or slaughter the other members of the males of the other tribe, take the women in, or vice versa. So it's not in male interest to do what females do. And that's why men tend to be more nationalist and more interested in tribal and ethnic identity. You remember my video on assortative mating where I talked about the preference blue-eyed men have for blue-eyed women, but it's not a preference that is reciprocated by women. That's related to paternity assurance. And all these issues essentially revolve around the limiting factors of reproduction, women, and the, I would argue, somewhat harsher and stricter limitations placed on men in terms of reproductive success and access to reproductive resources. It's meaningless in a world of just men. Every man is a competitor. But if you get behind the tribal banner, then you might have a shot at reproduction, at status, etc. Women can be much more fluid. Women are much more fluid on every front, sexually, in terms of loyalty, etc. And so I think the explanation is pretty simple. It just comes down to historical and prehistorical variables that have influenced male behavior that disallow for any kind of identity as men as such, but do in fact allow for identity as men of some particular tribe, black men, white men, whatever it might be, English men, and you could go down the ideological pathways, libertarian men, whatever. But certainly that type of traction that we've seen bear witness to in recent years is it's not shocking, and I was puzzled by, well, frankly speaking, Coltane's state of being puzzled, because it seems pretty obvious to me that this is what is afoot and what's going on here. That's how men operate. Men don't really like other men. At best, they might like men of the same tribe. No homo, right? And as I draw this video to a close, I'm sort of it reminds me of a story, basically, of a recent experience I had when I was getting my internet set up with my internet provider, getting it reset up, rather, here, where I am now, the new place. And the previous tenant of the place I live was signed up with the same company. And I said, well, okay, I'll do you a favor. I don't know if it's plausible, but I'll try to take over your contract and arrange something. And I'll never forget what the guy said. Why are you helping him out? Is he your brother or something? That sort of, and it really just drives home the lesson here that, oh, why would you help a completely, some guy who's, reasonably nice to you, fair enough, but why did you help him out? Because, reasons, right? He's not your brother. And do you know him? Are you related? That's kept asking me. No. So I think as a rule, it's just a very weird thing for men to help other men out and to even rally behind any sort of manner. It's never going to happen. It's why the MRM will always be a failure and will never succeed. The evolutionary variables at work are just too heavy-handed to allow them to overcome them through what I would call a philosophical course correction. If we could alter our behavior at the level of the genome, well, maybe, but we're not there yet. So that's a long time coming. But it certainly explains why something like Ibmora might be popular and absolutely explains why the alt-right has gained traction. Disenfranchised young white men with few prospects getting behind the banner of a very easily accessible identity, the identity of having white skin and being of European heritage. I'm generally not impressed by that, but hey, it's just basic human nature at work. And goes a long way to explaining things and the sort of microcosm we live in. Anyway, I think that's a sufficient explanation for the ongoings of ethnic male tribal identity, and also an explanation why women don't share that in the slightest. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. There will be more to come, I hope, in the future, if the drilling ever ceases. And yeah, I guess if I'm still alive, you take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.